Senator, presidential candidate, and Secretary of State are just three of the titles John Kerry has earned in his career. The man has been a staple in Washington, and Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen looks at how one big deal could loom very large for determining Secretary Kerry's legacy.
From the day that those talks began, we were crystal clear that we would not accept anything less than a good deal.
And how good of a deal you think the Iran nuclear accord is likely determines how good of a Secretary of State you think John Kerry was. 5 other world powers signed on, including Russia and China, but Kerry was the driving force through 2 years of negotiations, and his legacy largely rests on the deal's success going forward.
We now have a deal in place, and it is being implemented by all sides, that will preclude Iran from ever achieving nuclear weapons capability.
In exchange for curbs on its nuclear program, Iran received tens of billions in sanctions relief, sometimes in massive infusions of cash. Critics charge the deal should have forced Iran to dismantle its nuclear program, not preserve it, that some military sites have been closed off to UN inspectors, and that the deal has actually strengthened the leading state sponsor of terrorism.
What Kerry did not have is a kind of a sound strategic judgment. Of course, Iranian nuclear program was a serious challenge to the United States. But if you would talk to Gulf states, to the Saudis, they would tell you. But they were even more concerned about Iran getting billions of dollars once the sanctions are lifted, and being able to use these billions of dollars for all kinds of military build-up and subversion in the Gulf.
And with Iran aggressively testing ballistic missiles, harassing U.S. warships, even seizing American sailors at gunpoint, Kerry's own spokesman admitted the nuclear diplomacy may have emboldened the regime.
But you can't rule out that, in fact, this deal has served as a cause for this more aggressive posture.
I mean, I can't rule that out.
The other major foreign policy issue of Kerry's tenure, Syria's civil war, with its death toll exceeding 400,000, its displacement of 6 million others, its obliteration of whole cities, Kerry inherited. He doggedly pursued diplomacy with Russia without success.
He would be the first to tell you that he's obviously frustrated by where we are in Syria, and that our diplomatic efforts have not been successful.
The flood of foreign fighters to Syria, the establishment of a caliphate there and in Iraq by ISIS, the large-scale intervention in the conflict by Russia and Iran, propping up Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. In all this, critics point to the president's infamous failure in 2013 to enforce his own red line against Assad for using chemical weapons. Before the president backed down, Kerry had invested his own stature in a defense of imminent airstrikes.
And history would judge us all extraordinarily harshly if we turned a blind eye to a dictator's wanton use of weapons of mass destruction.
And when the president decided instead to seek congressional authorization for strikes that never came, as the U.S. and Russia hastily hatched a plan to evacuate Syria's declared stockpile of chemical weapons, Kerry's face telegraphed his own incredulity. Elsewhere, he tried and failed, like many before him, to broker a deal in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, carried out President Obama's restoration of diplomatic ties with Cuba, absent any reforms by the Castro regime, and shepherded to completion the Paris Climate Accords, a subject Kerry equated in significance to terrorism.
It's hard for some people to grasp it, but what you are doing here right now is of equal importance because it has the ability to literally save life on the planet itself.
You got a friend.
Yet Kerry's response to terrorism, as when he brought folk rock legend James Taylor to sing for Paris after the Charlie Hebdo attack, sometimes earned the Secretary of State ridicule.
I'm sorry, that was adolescent foreign policy. It was embarrassing. What John Kerry has done over and over again is try to match his diplomatic efforts to the delusional narratives coming out of the White House. And there's been this terrible disconnect with reality, with things on the ground. Thus, the endless talks over Syria that have gone nowhere, where we end up watching the horror in Aleppo right now.
Even Kerry's harshest critics told us he will be remembered as a decent man and a tireless public servant. Of course, his legacy will also include his 3 decades representing Massachusetts in the U.S. Senate, his decorated Navy service in Vietnam, and his campaign against that war upon his return home. Doug?